You are listening to a History of War audio documentary. For the best experience, use headphones. And if you want to march with us into the battles of the past, subscribe now. Now, let us step into the shadows of the past. The battle for Crete was unique. It should stand for all time as a lesson. Europe, 1941. The Axis war machine stretches from the North Cape to the sands of Africa. France lies crushed. The Balkans are aflame. And in the deep waters of the eastern Mediterranean, a single island remains, a rugged mountain fortress standing in the path of Adolf Hitler's empire. That island is Crete. Its cliffs rise like spears from the sea. Its valleys are steep and defiant, its people proud and unyielding. To control Crete is to command the Aegean. To command the Aegean is to threaten Egypt, the Suez Canal, and Britain's lifeline to India. In May 1941, the German High Command launches Operation Mercury, the first great airborne invasion in history. The world has never seen such an assault before. Thousands of parachutes will descend from the skies. Dozens of airfields, ports, and villages will become battlegrounds. And in the shadow of these mountains, the myth of Hitler's paratroopers, the Fallschirmjäger, will be both born and destroyed. This is the story of the battle for Crete, a story of daring, blood, and ruin. The origins of the battle lie in the Balkans. In April 1941, Hitler turned his armies south. Yugoslavia was smashed in 11 days. Greece fell soon after, its defenses broken by German tanks and Stuka dive bombers. But the British would not abandon their allies so easily. From Athens and the Greek mainland, nearly 57,000 British, Australian, and New Zealand troops were evacuated by the Royal Navy, many of them brought here to Crete. By mid-May, the island's garrison stood at almost 42,000 Allied troops, alongside several thousand Greek soldiers and hastily armed civilians. Their commander was Major General Bernard Freyberg, a decorated New Zealand veteran of the First World War. Crete itself was no ordinary outpost. Its position was a dagger aimed at German supply lines across the Mediterranean. From the island's airfields, the Royal Air Force could strike deep into the Balkans. From its harbors, the Royal Navy could patrol the sea routes to North Africa. Adolf Hitler understood the danger, and Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, saw an opportunity. For Göring, Crete would be a proving ground for his elite force, the Fallschirmjäger. Trained in secrecy, hardened in earlier campaigns, these paratroopers were to be the spearhead of a new kind of war from the sky. The plan was bold. Thousands of men would leap from Junkers Ju-52 transport planes and seize the island's airfields in a matter of hours. Once secured, waves of German aircraft would land reinforcements. Gebirgsjäger, the Alpine mountain troops of Bavaria. With air supremacy, the Luftwaffe would hammer the Royal Navy at sea and crush Allied resistance on land. The operation was codenamed Mercury, the winged messenger of the gods. Yet in London, the British had a secret. Thanks to Ultra, the intelligence gained from breaking German Enigma codes, they already knew the Germans were coming. Freyberg and his staff prepared their defenses, certain that Crete would be the anvil upon which the airborne invasion would be broken. But war is not written in certainty, and the blood that would stain Crete's olive groves was still to be shed. For the German High Command, Crete was more than a military prize. It was a gamble with destiny. The mastermind of the operation was General Kurt Student, commander of the 11th Air Corps, the architect of Germany's airborne forces. Student was convinced that airborne troops could decide entire campaigns, striking like a thunderbolt behind enemy lines, sowing chaos before conventional armies arrived. His faith was absolute, but his plan carried enormous risk. Operation Mercury would be the first major invasion in history conducted almost entirely from the air. Over 500 Junkers Ju-52 transport aircraft would deliver the assault. Paratroopers, laden with little more than pistols, rifles, and grenades, would leap into fire-swept zones. Heavy weapons would follow in containers dropped separately, or not at all. The objectives were clear. In the west, the critical airfield of Malem, gateway to Chania and the island's nerve center. In the center, Rhetimnon. In the east, Heraklion, Crete's capital and another key airstrip. If these could be seized, the island would fall. But Student's men faced formidable defenders. Freiberg commanded seasoned troops, the New Zealand 2nd Division, Australian brigades, and British battalions, stiffened by artillery and naval support. Crete's rugged terrain, with its steep ridges and narrow passes, favored the defenders. And unknown to Student, Allied intelligence already had partial knowledge of his plan through ultra-intercepts. Yet fate is cruel. Freiberg, fearing a naval landing as much as an airborne assault, dispersed his forces. This fatal misjudgment left the paratroopers a chance, small but real. Meanwhile, Hermann Göring promised Hitler swift victory. "The island will fall in days," he boasted. The Führer, reluctant to waste strength before his looming campaign in the east, hesitated. But in the end, seduced by Göring's confidence and the dream of a lightning conquest, Hitler approved. Thus, on the morning of the 20th of May, 1941, as the sun rose over the white mountains of Crete, history prepared for its first great experiment in airborne warfare. Dawn, Tuesday the 20th of May. The Mediterranean lies calm, the olive groves still in shadow. Then a distant rumble, a growing thunder across the sky. At first a hum, then a roar, then an avalanche of sound. Wave after wave of Junkers Ju-50s swarm over the coastline, engines droning like locusts. Overhead, Stuka's dive bombers scream downward, blasting defensive positions, ripping the earth apart. And from the bellies of the transports, the Fallschirmjäger leap into eternity. Thousands of parachutes bloom against the morning sky, white, green, and red canopies drifting like deadly flowers. For the defenders below, the spectacle is almost unreal. One New Zealand officer recalled, "It was as though the heavens had opened and were raining men." But the descent was a slaughter. Allied machine guns, rifles, and even farmers with old hunting pieces raked the sky. Paratroopers were cut down before they touched the ground, their parachutes collapsing into bloody rags. Others landed only to be butchered by waiting defenders, or hacked at by enraged Cretan villagers armed with knives, scythes, and axes. At Malem, the German 7th Fallschirmjäger Division was torn apart in its first moments. Companies were annihilated before they could regroup. Heavy equipment containers were lost or landed far from their units. Men fought with pistols against rifles and bayonets. At Raytimnon and Heraklion, the story was the same. Paratroopers fell into fields already occupied by Australians, New Zealanders, and British soldiers. Whole battalions ceased to exist within minutes of landing. The courage of the Fallschirmjäger was unquestionable, but their gamble seemed doomed. By nightfall, more than 2,000 German paratroopers lay dead. The cost was staggering. For the first time in the war, Hitler's elite had been hurled into an inferno and nearly consumed. And yet, amidst the chaos, amidst the fields of death, an opportunity began to flicker. At Malem Airfield, the most vital prize of all, confusion and exhaustion crept into Allied ranks. New Zealand defenders, uncertain of German strength, began to fall back. And with that faltering step, the fate of Crete began to shift. Malem, the key to Crete, a strip of earth, little more than dust and stone, yet the single airfield in western Crete capable of receiving German transport planes. Whoever held Malem controlled the outcome of the entire battle. On the first day, the Germans had paid dearly for it. Fallschirmjäger units had been shattered in the olive groves surrounding the runway. The defenders, New Zealanders of the 22nd Battalion, supported by artillery and machine gun nests, held the high ground, especially the vital feature known as Hill 107. From here, they commanded the airfield with deadly fire. For hours, German attempts to seize Malem collapsed in blood. Ju-52s circled helplessly, unable to land amidst the chaos. Bodies littered the fields. By nightfall, the Germans clung to a few scattered positions, isolated, leaderless, and nearly destroyed. By all rights, Malem should have remained in Allied hands. But war is not governed by rights. It is governed by decisions. Through that night, confusion reigned among the defenders. Communications broke down. German infiltration and the relentless bombing of the Luftwaffe sowed uncertainty. Exhausted, cut off from higher command, the New Zealand battalion on Hill 107 mistook their situation for disaster. Convinced they were about to be surrounded, they withdrew under cover of darkness. At dawn, the Germans found the hill abandoned. For the Fallschirmjäger, it was as though fate itself had intervened. Immediately, they surged forward, securing the high ground. With Hill 107 lost, the Allies could no longer dominate the airfield. By midday on 21st May, the first German aircraft dared to attempt landings. Junkers Ju-52s, riddled with bullet holes, skidded onto the strip. Some crashed and burst into flames. Others unloaded their cargo. Fresh troops of the 5th Gebirgsjäger Division, mountain soldiers hardened by campaigns in Norway and the Balkans. Despite savage fire, more and more aircraft descended. Reinforcements poured in, one plane load after another. What had begun as a near-fatal gamble was transforming into salvation. The Germans, battered and bloodied, had gained their bridgehead. Malem had fallen, and with it the fate of Crete hung by a thread. With Malem lost, the door to Crete was open, and through that door poured ruin. From the skies, Junkers Ju-52s now landed in steady waves, disgorging Gebirgsjäger, Germany's mountain troops, men trained for endurance and relentless advance. They came armed not with pistols and knives like the paratroopers before them, but with rifles, mortars, and machine guns. Suddenly, the balance shifted. For General Freiberg, the loss of Malem was catastrophic. Without that airfield, the Allies had no way to stem the German tide. Worse still, the Royal Navy, Britain's lifeline in the Mediterranean, now found itself under ceaseless assault from above. In the waters north of Crete, British cruisers and destroyers hunted desperately to intercept German reinforcements by sea, but the Luftwaffe ruled the skies. Stuka dive bombers fell upon the ships with howling fury. Decks erupted in fire and steel. The cruiser HMS Gloucester was struck and sank with hundreds of men. HMS Fiji, HMS Kelly, and others followed. In 3 days of savage attacks, the Royal Navy lost 3 cruisers, 6 destroyers, and suffered crippling damage to many more. Vice Admiral Cunningham, commander of the Mediterranean Fleet, sent a grim signal to London. The Navy cannot hold Crete without air cover. The losses are insupportable. On land, German forces expanded their grip. Reinforced paratroopers and mountain troops pressed eastward from Malem, pushing the New Zealanders and Australians back. The Allies fought with determination, but every hour, more Germans arrived while Allied supplies dwindled. Freiberg understood the truth. Crete could no longer be held. His men were exhausted, ammunition was short, and the Luftwaffe's unchallenged dominance meant no relief could reach them. By 27th May, the order was given: retreat south toward the evacuation beaches near Sfakia. For the soldiers of Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and Greece, it was a march of despair. Across the harsh mountains, under constant air attack, they trudged toward the sea. Civilians aided them, guiding through goat tracks and ravines, hiding the wounded, defying German patrols. But for thousands, there would be no escape. The island was slipping into German hands, and the shadow of surrender crept closer with every hour. The retreat to the south was brutal. Men stumbled across the White Mountains under burning sun and constant Luftwaffe attack. Stuka sirens shrieked overhead, bombs shattered roads, and machine gun fire raked the valleys. Every step was marked by exhaustion, every mile by death. Yet still, thousands reached the narrow coves near Sfakia and Horus-Fakion, where the Royal Navy waited. Night after night, destroyers and cruisers crept to the rocky shore, their decks blacked out, their sailors hauling desperate men aboard. It was a race against time. On 28th May, Cunningham ordered, "Crete must be held no longer. Evacuate all possible." The Navy strained every sinew. In just 4 nights, over 16,000 men were rescued under the cover of darkness. But the cost was savage. Each approach to the island brought the Navy under ferocious air assault. Ships staggered back to Alexandria, scarred and burning. Hundreds of sailors were killed. On land, chaos deepened. Those who could not reach the beaches were left behind. By dawn of 1st June, the last ships departed. More than 12,000 Allied soldiers remained trapped on Crete. Exhausted, out of ammunition, surrounded, they had no choice but surrender. They marched into German captivity, their war reduced to silence behind barbed wire. For the Germans, victory had been won. The swastika now flew above the ruined towns of Crete, but it was a victory carved out of blood. The Fallschirmjäger, Hitler's pride, had been decimated. Elite battalions, once boasting of invincibility, were reduced to fragments. Over 4,000 German dead lay scattered across the fields, villages, and ridges of Crete. For the Luftwaffe, more than 150 transport planes were destroyed, a loss that could never be replaced. And above it all, a grim realization spread through the German command. Yes, Crete had been taken, but never again would Hitler risk his paratroopers on such a scale. Operation Mercury was both the triumph and the tomb of Germany's airborne dream. The battle was over. Crete had fallen. For Germany, Operation Mercury was both a victory and a curse. The island was theirs, but the price was staggering. 4,000 German dead, 2,600 wounded, 150 transport aircraft lost. It was the highest casualty rate the Wehrmacht had suffered in a single operation to that point in the war. The Fallschirmjäger, once hailed as invincible, had been bled white. Entire companies ceased to exist. Their commander, General Kurt Student, admitted, "The losses were so high that I forbade further airborne operations of that kind." Adolf Hitler drew the same conclusion. Though impressed by the courage of his paratroopers, he declared that never again would he gamble so many elite troops in a massive airborne assault. Crete had been their pinnacle and their grave. For the Allies, the defeat was bitter. Nearly 1,700 killed, 1,700 wounded, and over 12,000 prisoners taken by the Germans. Yet their defense had inflicted wounds so severe that they altered German strategy for the rest of the war. And for Crete itself, a darker shadow began. German occupation descended upon the island. The Cretan people, who had risen against the invaders with knives and rifles, paid dearly. Entire villages were burned. Civilians were executed in reprisal for partisan activity. Massacres scarred the land. Condomari, Candanos, Vianos, names written in blood. But the spirit of resistance did not die. The Cretan underground, supported by British commandos and the Special Operations Executive, waged a fierce campaign of sabotage and ambush until the very end of the war. The island became a symbol that even under occupation, defiance lived on. Thus, the legacy of Crete was paradox. For Germany, a tactical triumph, but a strategic failure. For the Allies, a defeat that carried seeds of future strength. For the people of Crete, a nightmare of fire and blood, endured with courage. In the end, Operation Mercury stands as a lesson carved in stone. The Fallschirmjäger had leapt into history with unrivaled daring. They fell from the skies into a storm of bullets and knives, into the fury of soldiers and villagers alike. They seized victory by inches, by blood, by sacrifice. But their triumph was hollow. Never again would the Reich dare such an assault. The airborne dream died in the olive groves of Crete. Winston Churchill would later write, "The battle for Crete should be remembered as an example of what determined defense can do, even against the most daring attack." Crete remains that symbol of courage in defense, of bravery in assault, and of the terrible price of hubris. On its rocky hills, amidst the graves of thousands, the truth was written. The paratroopers had leapt from the sky into glory, but in the mountains of Crete, they found only shadows. The battle for Crete ended in fire and shadow, but history does not end. It continues in every story we tell. If you want to march further with us into the battlefields of the past, subscribe to History of War. Like this video to keep the memory alive, and ring the bell so you never miss the next campaign.